Morning everyone, we're going to be doing something really different today. So what the plan is, we'll see how it pans out in the reality, but the plan is to do a watercolour landscape, as you can see here, inspired by this beautiful photo by Akbar Nurmati, and then work into it with some oil pastels and playing around with trickery there. First of all, I can't say I've done it before, but I can't see any problem. It should be really easy. Always the most fateful words, I'm guessing. And secondly, you're going to need various different materials. So let's start off first of all with the watercolour. Now for the watercolour, what you're looking at using is 300 GSM watercolour paper. This is A4 piece paper. You do need to check out the aspect ratio of the reference image to the shape here, because this is a little bit skinnier. So generally you're going to need to knock off about an inch, slightly less than an inch, to get that nice long panoramic view. Once you've got that, you can see I'm using a HB pencil before anyone asks me. You want to look at putting that horizon line, and that horizon is slightly low and halfway. That's about halfway up the page, so it's slightly low. So if I'm looking at this, that's about halfway. I'm going to bring down my horizon line around here. Okay, you can see huge amount of drawing skill required at this stage. Now once we've done that, we're going to play around with the watercolours, because this is abstract landscapes. So this means lots of different techniques and playing around and having fun, experimenting. Now I've got my watercolours to my left. Here you can see I have tablets. It's up to you if you've got tubes or tablets. You'll find if you've got the tubes, your colours are going to be a bit more intense than if you've got the tablets. I've got a selection of brushes, and there's a big brush in there. Don't forget the big brush, you're going to need that. I've got my palette, okay, which is just sitting on here. I've also got a card, one of those kind of plastic cards, which I've managed to put acrylic paint onto my watercolour paper. We're going to ignore that though, we're going to move on. There may be a bit of shadowing work that's required around that point. So I've got a bit of kind of gift card, plastic gift card that I'm going to be using. And I seem to be accumulating more and more dirt on my nice clean piece of watercolour paper. I've got a pair of scissors because I'm going to cut my card down. I've also got a piece of kitchen roll, which you can see that I've managed to contaminate everything with black acrylic, even though I'm not painting with it today. That's going to come in very handy in a little while. I've got some water pots, and you're probably going to need a few different glass water pots to work this out. And there's different things going in these water pots, so you know, we'll see how it pans out in the long run. So, what else have I got? I'm trying to think. I have some salt, and I'm not using salt in the traditional way. We're going a little bit different. And I also have some bleach. Now, personally, I didn't find the bleach technique work that great, but maybe I'm using the wrong brand. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Have a go, see what you think your end. If you find out what the answer is, do message me, because I'd be intrigued to know. I do have some odd bits of tissue around to clean everything, and some spare water pots like I said earlier. Now with this piece of paper is going to get pretty wet. Make sure you've taped it down. With something that's going to get this wet, I don't tape it down all the way around, because I find like the airflow going underneath just stops the paper from really cockling and getting bad, and taking ages to dry. It can be an absolute pain to dry. So I've just taped top and bottom. And you can see there, right, I pointed to those in reverse because I don't obviously even know what top and bottom is. You can tell it's been a long week. Once you've got that done, be aware on the surface that you're working on. So this is a nice flat desk. If you have your desk tilted, or you have it on a board that's tilted, you're going to find that you're going to get mass running of colours. I would advise you to have a flat surface to work on for something like this technique. So let's get going. Now we're going to work from the sky down into the landscape below. First of all, we're going to get some water, and I have some water here, and we're going to do the sky using the bleach technique. So I've got some water and I'm putting in some bleach. If you're doing this, make sure that you're doing it in a well ventilated room, because bleach is really not the best thing to be breathing in. Now everyone's going to ask me about the quantity, and I found that you probably need, I don't know, about 2 spoonfuls, dessert spoons, quite a decent amount to get this to work. Right, I'm just trying to build that up without the bubbles popping over the top. They don't teach this as university courses, do they? Right, put my bleach in, put my lid on, make sure my window's open so I've got some good ventilation. Then I'm going to get my brush. Okay, and I'm going to use my big brush to apply this to the surface. Now before I apply that to the surface, it's wise to have your colours pre-made up. So I've got my colours here, and I will just start picking those up off the palette. I'm going to go and work light to dark, so I'm going to use a lemon yellow, then I've got a cadmium orange, and then I'm going to use an ultramarine blue because I'm looking at this sky area and they're about suitable for that shade. And so, just like by magic, they appear. So, let's get a first brush. I'm going to dip it in my bleach water. And then I'm going to apply a decent wash across my piece of paper. Do not use a natural head brush for this. Bleach will eat into any natural hair. Go for a synthetic, it's far hardier and also cheaper, so if it does eat into it, you don't have to worry about the hair just kind of melting away on your brush, like so. And I'm going to pick up my brush and grab my yellow, put that down here. Now the idea of the bleach is that it just softens out the edges of the colours and gives you a little bit more of a blend. You won't see it in the early stages, but as it goes along and it dries, you should be able to get to see it a little bit more. I'm going to grab it into my orange. My brush looks quite lovely because it's a beautiful cloud formation that I'm mimicking. Let's grab a little bit of cerulean. And the cerulean should be, you should have lemon into a cerulean for a sunset. Now I'm going to grab some stronger blues. I'm going to take it up to a little bit more of a cobalt. And then just to really give it a bit of a kick, get a little bit of an ultramarine. You could use a Prussian if you've got it, that'll give quite a nice result as well. Okay, you should find that the colours kind of just bleed out on the edge in a very unusual way because of that watercolour. If you're getting anywhere where you're getting a little bit of a valley and some of the colour is slightly just kind of accumulating there, use a tissue and blot up any excess. It should just take it out. But you see like these swirls? That's what you're looking for. It's ultimately the name of the game with this. Remember that this is just a first layer. We're going to be working much more down on top of this with the oil pastels. Now once you've done that, then we're going to look at doing this bottom one. So this means, again, you're going to be mixing something different into the basic wash layer of water. I'm just going to get some fresh water, clean my brush, and I'll show you what I mean. You are wise to allow this to settle and dry, because if you put the wash underneath, you will find that this will run even if it's flat. So take your time, clean your brush, make sure your water is all clean so you don't get any cross contamination, and then come back to it for the second layer down on the landscape. Right, so I've cleaned my water. Now for the base down here, I'm going to be using salt water. So I've got some salt and I've got some water. I'm going to pour some in. Everyone's going to think how much, just pour a decent amount in. Probably again about 2 spoonfuls. Now the trick with this is always to give it a good stir and make sure that the salt has thoroughly dispersed in the water. Just like that. Right, so now I've done that, I'm just going to get my colours ready, and I'm looking down here and I can see like these reds and the very light creamy shades and the purples and a little bit of the green. So I'm going to just get those pre-made on my palette. So if I start off with the light shade, I'm going to go with like a yellow ochre. Then I'm going to grab a cadmium red. Then I'm going to grab, I've got a sap green. And then I've got a lilac. Now it's the same approach, but now with the salt water. So if you take your big brush, and just lay that across there, it's easy to do. And I'm going to put down a wash, and quite a decent wash. You should really be able to see that the paper is glossy and wet with this wash. Up to the boundary of my horizon line. You may have to duck your head around, look at where your light source is, and so you can see that it's all shiny. Grab my brush and cross-contaminate all my yellow ochre. Let's just get a bit more of that. I'm going to just tap in where I'm going to have that yellow ochre light area. And you'll find that you get like these swirly patterns. And you can see I'm going to have a bit of a bleed from the top. It doesn't matter because remember this is abstract that we're going for. Right, I'm going to grab some of my red. Start tapping that in. Let's grab a little bit of the green. There's green going down here. If you want to, you can get your brush and you can swirl it in. You can get these like swirly patterns. I'm going to get some of that lilac and just bring that in as well for the mountain range. And I'm not worried about getting the shape at all at this stage because I'm going to come in a little while. Alright, so now while that's setting, I'm going to grab my plastic card and I'm going to cut a little bit off. So you can see here how much I'm cutting off. Probably about 1 centimetre thickness. And I want it so I get that flat edge into that flat edge. Now I'm going to grab a little bit more of my dark purples, or you could put in some blue if you wanted to. You know, you could shake things up if I put a bit of crimson in there. Oh, that look quite good. Okay. I'm going to get a little bit more salt water down. Put that in so it's very wet. I'm going to pick up my card on the flat end, start just scratching into the paint, and then I'm going to start putting down those mountains using my card. Don't worry if you get too much of a bleed, remember we're going to be working into this. It's really not anything to worry about. Right, I'm going to get some dark blue. Put dark blue into that tone. I think it needs to be a little bit darker. That's it, so you start drawing using the card a little bit more. Scrape it in. Draw lines if you want to. You can scratch into a surface and be quite hard with it. And mark the paper. You can change colour if you want to. Don't feel like you have to stick to a lilac. Now the trick here is not to overdo it. It's easy to fall into that camp. That camp will make it mucky and you will lose any structure. Always know when to quit. I think I'm getting to that stage now. Right, so next, what we're going to be looking at doing is doing some splattering work. Now, before I can splatter, I need to allow this to dry because if you splatter, you're going to find that all your marks just vanish into the wet surface and the paper is thoroughly wet. Give it some time to dry, just to go off, and that means that when we come in, we're going to be using our piece of kitchen roll to mask off areas and create some splatting texture even. I'll see you in a moment. Okay, so it's fundamentally dry. It's got a little bit of a ripple in it, but it's fundamentally dry. You should be able to get some interesting dots on this. Now what we're going to do next is I'm going to take a piece of this tissue and I'm going to kind of try and get a little bit of an up and down raggedy texture too, so that I can protect that bit. Now you see how I want to keep the sky, keep this bit, and I'm going to bring that in so you can see that raggedy kind of silhouette. Now I'm going to get my brush and I'm going to mix up some crimson red. Let's put it down here. And then I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to start splattering. Just down here. Really red finger, but anyway. You can see you're starting to get that there. I'm going to do a little bit more of the splattering, but I'm going to use a few different colours. And I can bring it down here if I wanted to. I'm going to go for a little bit more of a green shade. At this point, if you wanted to, you could get a smallish brush and just start working up a little bit of detail, so you can see how like dark a few bits are. Remember, we're going to go in with the oil pastels. You don't have to worry too much about this, but if you wanted to keep it more of a watercolour, you might find that you want to just bleed in a little bit here. Now you can see I've put in the darks. I'm going to grab a little bit of clean water and I'm going to just bleed that out to create the silhouette of that mountain. Okay, so I'm going to now let this dry and then we're going to go in with the oil pastels. I'll see you in a little while. Right, so now this is dried off, I'm going to move on to the oil pastels. This, you can see, has loads of potentials. You could paint into this with watercolours and be really playful and have some fun with it. It's just up to you in what direction you want to take it. Remember, this is about abstracting, so you're taking textures and different techniques, you're playing around with them and seeing what happens and building up good contrast. A lot of the time, the key to keeping this and this tied together is where the highlights and the shadows come. If you can keep those the same, it'll look great. Right, now let's move the watercolours out the way and get ready for some oil pastels. Okay, so for the oil pastels, I've got my two different sets. I've got my Pentels, which are a little bit smaller and better for the thinner detail and detail. Or thinner detail. I've got my Pentels, which are better for the detail, because they're smaller and easy to handle, and then I've got my Faber-Castells, which are good for area coverage because they're a bit bigger, so I can get it down there quicker. It's completely up to you what you prefer and if you want to mix and match the two. Also with this, I've got a palette knife which I'm going to use to scrape in. You could use a normal knife, it's up to you. Anything sharp, a corner of, I don't know, a triangle. It might be, you know, worth it, or a chopstick. It's whatever you've got around, laying around that you can scratch into it. You can see you've got the card. You could scratch in from that corner, that's quite sharp. I've also got a paintbrush, which is going to be helpful in a little while. And I'm going to use a little bit of baby oil as well at some point, as well as a spare piece of paper that I'm going to cover in pigment. So this is just printer paper that I folded in half. It's going to be for this lower section. Okay, so let's do the lower section first, which is what I was just talking about. That's when I'm going to go in for these bigger, chunkier pastels. Now for this, I need to take my spare piece of paper and cover it in my colours that I want. And I need to cover it quite a lot, a nice thick layer. If you wanted to, you could mix it up. So I'm going for some orange in here with some of the red. And I'm also going to put in some of the cream. And make sure you've got good thick coverage, that's the key. Once you've got this, then you need to be turning it over. Okay. Want to, you can take a pencil, make sure you've got a nice sharp point, and draw on the back. See there? Oh, that actually brings through the red really well. Right, so what you can see I'm doing is ultimately holding the oil pastel sheet of paper face down and then pressing onto the back, and this is transferring the pigment from the oil pastel that I've put on the front of the paper to the top of the watercolour picture. And you can play around with this and create different patterns and textures as you like. Okay, so that's one way of using the oil pastels. The other one, where if we're going to work this up a little bit more, is going to be by taking your oil pastels and scratching into it. Now this is where I'm going to go for the smaller ones because it's just easy to control. And grab some purple. So up here, maybe I want to go a little bit deeper. Now if you're going to scratch, you do have to apply a decent thickness of pigment. Take that in, and then I'm using something sharp like a palette knife. I'm just scratching through. Okay. The trick is not to overwork this, to keep it fairly gentle, not to apply too much, because you don't want to cover up all those effects that you got from the watercolours. Do it a little bit over here in the darker area. Okay, so you can see how much more textured that's becoming. And you can work that up to a much higher level if you wanted to. Just showing you the interest of getting in and playing around with this. Now let's go in with the sky. For the sky I'm going to use some baby oil. So I'm going to take my lightest colours first. I'm going to take some yellow and throw in a little bit of yellow down for the sky. Then let's work a little bit of orange into that. Okay, so let's put in a little bit of this purple, darker shadows. And when you're using baby oil, really what you want to do is to get all your pastel down to start off with, and then work the baby oil in at the end. Be careful about putting your oil pastels next to one another because they will mix, and you're going to get a little bit of a slushy dark muddy colour if you over mix and you get too much pastel in one area. And I'm going to go in for a little bit more of a blue sky. More intense sky blue colour. You can see the coverage that I'm trying not to overdo it because I do want some of that watercolour effect from the initial stages that we worked up. And I know at the moment it's going to look a bit crazy, just go with it. Okay. So I'm quite happy with that. Now I'm going to go in with my baby oil. I'm going to grab my brush. Just pour it a little bit on the top. You don't need a little much. You can see I've just got a little bit. And then I'm going to work for the light areas to start off with, the yellows. And it's going to pick up the yellow and it will move it around and smooth it out. And you'll be able to move the yellow into the orange. Now you're probably going to need a tissue in between just to take off any cross-contamination. You could, if you wanted to, pour this out into a container. It probably would be wise. Get less cross-contamination. See how I'm picking up that lilac-y shade? Kind of makes the oil pastel like a watercolour, but with much stronger, intense pigment. Okay, so you should be getting something that looks like this. So you can work this up a little bit more if you want to. We can fine tune it. So I'm going to go and I'm just going to fine tune a little bit more intense shadow on a few places in the sky. Right. There you go. Quirky, fun little mini project that brings together watercolours and oil pastels using various different techniques. I've probably gone a bit overboard with the techniques, but I thought you'd have fun and get a little bit more playful and looser if you went with it. Typically with abstract painting, the bigger you go, the looser you're going to get because the marks become freer. So it's up to you. This was just an intro to get you playing around with how to apply the various mediums. I hope you've had fun and you've learned a lot, as always, because I know you do. And I'll see you next week. Have a lovely week, everyone. Bye!